Hey everybody, video here for you today. Going back to ancient America. Now back in 2015, I made 15-20 videos on ancient America and that got me interested. Then in the spring of 2018, started making another ancient America series and that's what I'm still doing today. The very first video I did in the spring of 2018 was on this place, so I'm going to talk about it again today. A lot of these places, the important ones. I'm doing some remakes of videos I made a few years ago. Right down here, this is the site. Place they call Watson Break right down here. The site is not open to the public, but it's right down here. Ancient mounds going back 5,400 years at least, right down here. Here's an artist illustration of the Watson Break site. Remember 5,400 years ago? That's what they say it dates to. And remember, I've learned this in my Ancient America videos. When a place is dated to 5,400 years ago, that's at least how old it is, and that's important. But man, 5,400 years ago, that's before the first dynasty of Egypt. That's before the proto-dynastic period. That stretches back into the murky pre-dynastic period that we know virtually little about. Well, this site here in Louisiana, 5,400 years old, we don't know bleep about the culture who built these. Here's a video I made back in March of 2018, and this is really the one that kicked off my newest Ancient America series that I'm still working on today. Watson Break is about 60 miles from the massive Poverty Point site. Notice the massive earthen rings that go around here. They stop right up here, but I think at one point in history they came all the way around here. This was a big massive circle. I think flooding took out some of these rings right down here. Then we have one of the biggest mounds in ancient America right down here. How this was originally shaped to be intended to be, anybody's guess, but massive earthen project right down here. Here is LiDAR of the huge Poverty Point site. You notice a massive mound right there, kind of an odd shape. And we go right up here. Here is LiDAR, the Watson Break site. So to give you an idea of the landscape here, the mounds, how they are laid out. Is Watson Break the oldest mound site? Well, I made a video on the Frenchman Bend Mounds, 6,800 years old. I made that video during the shutdown. Here it says, LSU mounds could be the oldest man-made structure, but peer review is necessary, professor says. This is Brooks B. Elwood. He is the professor in LSU's Department of Geology and Geophysics. He thinks that these mounds go back more than 11,000 years. I'd like to read his report on that, but I find that very interesting. Here's a mound at Watson Break, one of the larger ones, trees, vegetation, old leaves on it and stuff. But when getting the chronological order of these sites put together, this is an important one. There are sites that came earlier, but this seemed to be a very important site. And then Poverty Point, built right nearby 2,000 years later. I think this had a very important influence on the starting of the Poverty Point culture, that is for sure. Here's a site plan of Watson Break. These mounds are labeled with letters through A through J, it looks like. So there are a number of mounds here. Could be some astronomical observations built in these. That's just what it looks like to my mind's eye. Here is one very old pic of one of the mounds here. Looks like it was kind of cut into here, but there's an old look. The Watson Break site. Here's a website I will leave below, a little artist illustration there. It says, Watson Break, an area mound south of Monroe, was discovered by local archaeologist Rika Jones more than 30 years ago. Since then, she has worked tirelessly to have the area declared a state park to preserve its treasures. And since we cannot visit this site, it's not publicly owned, let's listen to a news report that I found from a little earlier this year. This will give us a little look at the site. Let's just watch the video here.
A complex of ancient mounds is hidden in the woods of North Louisiana, south of Monroe. It's known as Watson Break.
And since much of the site is on our private property, it's not a place you can visit. But Dave McNamara gives us a tour in tonight's Heart of Louisiana.
We walked about a half mile through the woods as the trail blended with the raw forest. Our footsteps echoed through the green canopy of leaves. We were stepping on ground where ancient people lived thousands of years ago.
They were hunters, fishers, and gatherers.
Dr. Diana Greenlee, an archaeologist and professor at University of Louisiana Monroe, leads me to one of the oldest complexes of ancient mounds in America.
This is kind of the big great-granddaddy of them all, right?
So far, that's what it would appear. I mean, there are some that are older, but this is really complex and really just pretty amazing.
Through the trees, we finally see the shape of the largest mound rising from the forest floor. It's a massive amount of dirt that stands 25 feet tall.
Looks like they started construction around 5,400 years ago, and they would have stopped sometime around 4,800 years ago.
That means these structures were built before the Great Pyramids and Stonehenge. This large mound is among 11 man-made mounds connected by an oval-shaped ridge. The Watson Brake site was first reported to archaeologists in the early 1980s by a local resident, who noticed the earthworks after the land was cleared of timber. Some of the mounds only rise a few feet, but others dominate the landscape. But why these mounds were built remains a mystery.
It could be that it was a way to reinforce relationships and cooperation. It could be signaling to other people that, hey, we have the resources and the people that we can build cool stuff like this, so you should cooperate with us.
There is no public access to this mound site. The state has been able to acquire some of the area, but half of this is still privately owned. Researchers believe that ancient people occupied this site off and on for a period of several hundred years. Some Middle Archaic artifacts have been found here.
There are distinctive projectile points, spear or dart points, called Evans points. They have a distinctive notch. We have fired earth blocks or cubes. So these are undecorated. They're made of the dirt that's been fired.
You ever think about what life was like for these folks 4,000 or 5,000 years ago?
Yeah, I do. They're together with their family group, and other groups, whether they're here all the time together or whether they're just getting together once in a while. But I can imagine that they saw that as a fun time, and they're working together on a project.
Watson Brake is one of more than 800 mound sites that have been discovered around Louisiana. It shows how people built a large place to live together as they hunted and fished and lived off the land. With the heart of Louisiana, Dave McNamara, Fox 8 Local First.
I just thought that was good to show. I will leave the link for that news station's report on Watson Brake in the description. 5,400 years ago, this place got started. Poverty Point, people look at that as a very ancient site in ancient America. Well, this site is 2,000 years older, and there are sites older than this. So putting together the chronological order of all these mound sites, that's a pretty important thing to do. We're just starting to do that, really, just beginning today. This is becoming a more popular subject. I notice a lot of ancient history channels making videos on ancient American sites. I think that is great, but here's a map. Watson Brake is here. This is the Frenchman's Bend mound site, pretty close. Talked about that. I think that goes back to about 4,800 BC, if I remember. I mentioned the Hedgepeth site. Lower Jackson site, right next to Poverty Point. That's like 1,500 years older than Poverty Point. Do we really have the dating on Poverty Point accurate? Well, not so sure, but here are a few other sites. Might talk about one or two of those in the upcoming weeks or months. But ancient America, the history, just a lot more incredible than we can even imagine. I just wanted to do this video here today. Watson Brake, kind of a hazy mystery, 5,400 years old when this place got started, they say. So how far back was this culture flourishing before this site was erected? It had to have been flourishing for a long time. Is it associated to the Poverty Point culture that came up 2,000 years later nearby? Well, that is video on the Watson Brake site going back to 3,400 BC at least. I know I have some viewers in this area. If you're familiar with the Duck Dynasty show, I guess their house is within a few miles of here. That is a video coming from ancient America, Louisiana down here, fairly close to Poverty Point, but built 2,000 years earlier. What do we really know about ancient America? Well, I think we're starting to put together this story, slowly but surely. Hope you thought that was interesting. You all have a very nice day.